Good morning, everybody. My name is Jonathan Fisher from Cascade Rail Foundation and the Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive, here today at the Highline Heritage Museum in beautiful Burien, Washington. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today in person and online, and a special welcome to the people of the future that will watch this program on YouTube. These programs are usually recorded and put on YouTube a couple of days after the actual event. So sometime next week, you'll be able to watch this to eternity if you want. So today we have a repeat of last week's program. Last week, Frank Zellerhoff and I were at the Vashon History Museum on Vashon Island, Washington, where we shared this program with the Vashon community. Frank has lived on Vashon most all of his life. Today we're going to be looking at the Seattle waterfront, the Milwaukee Road on the Seattle waterfront, and the Milwaukee Road's unique barge operation on the Seattle waterfront, where the railroad would actually take freight cars, put them on barges, and float them all over Puget Sound, the Pacific Northwest, Canada, and all the way to Alaska. So it was quite an adventure and quite unique, and Frank's one of the last living people that really understood how that worked. So those of you that are familiar with Puget Sound will know that the U.S. Navy has a little naval base over in Bremerton, and there's the famous story, of course, about these barges, where the Navy was trying to get a ship into Bremerton through Puget Sound in the fog, and it was dense fog. And so they finally put somebody up on the bow to watch what was going on in front of them because they really couldn't see. And finally, the mate that was up on the bow told the captain, "Stop, there's something in front of us." And the captain said, "What is it?" And the mate said, "It looks like a freight train." And in fact, it was one of our Milwaukee barges, either toing or froing back and forth to Port Townsend. So today, Frank and I are going to take a trip down memory lane and look and see if we can understand how these barge operations worked. So thanks, everybody, for being here. And with that, let's get started. So Brad is with us today. Brad, thank you very much. Brad and I worked together to draw this map so that we would have a representation of what this area of the Seattle waterfront actually looks like.
Well, of course, this is Pier 27, as it tells you there. This is the east and west fence. This is storage for 20 and 21. This is the access to the barges. There's the Seattle Yard.
Yeah, you're on the right track.
You got the Burlington Northern Yard, and then you got the Seattle Yard. There's the waterfront. There's 4 tracks on the waterfront. Actually 5 tracks, the main line and 1, 2, 3, and 4. Number 3 track was a track that was used by the Union Pacific to bring grain cars down to the waterfront, and then the BN would pick them up at this end and take them over to the BN yard down by Lake Union. Down by the canal.
Right.
Those cars all went, the grain cars would go to the grain elevator that was down there off of Elliott. Right? Some of the cars could go further up to Everett and then up over Stevens Pass. Oh, this is the whole menagerie. This is from around in the 60s before I came down there. This is the yard office. This is the freight house. All this when I came here in the 70s, this was a big concrete slab where we unloaded trucks, the containers from rail cars onto trucks, and then and we interchanged to the BN here, And then further down here, we'd interchange to the UP at Argo Yard. Or to go to the waterfront, you'd pull cars off. To go to up to the peninsula, you'd pull cars out underneath here, down here, and then you'd bald face the cars along here into the yard that you saw in the previous pictures.
So we're going to look at the east side of the Milwaukee Road, and then we're going to switch over to the waterfront. So we're going to look at a couple of pictures along the way here. We've got about 75 images in total in this presentation. Where are we now?
Okay, now here you have Pier 27. You have both the 20 and 21 here on the south side of Pier 27. This looks to me to be the Foss 250. This looks like the Foss 118. That was a 15-car barge, but you could carry the large lumber racks on there. There's no ballast pumps on the Foss 118. The 250 and the 252 had ballast tanks. You could ballast the stern of the barge, so you could accommodate them at a higher elevation of tide than you could the 20 or 21. The 20 or 21, you were pretty much locked into a 5-foot high tide for unloading, but you could still load at maybe an 8-foot tide, because if you put cars like on the center track, you could bring the barge down a couple of feet. You really had to play with the tide.
So we're going to take a look behind one of my favorite buildings, the old Sears building in downtown Seattle. The Sears building was built shortly after this area was filled in by the city, and was originally used as a fulfillment center for people that ordered stuff out of the Sears catalog. So here we are.
So in this photograph, this is in this particular photo, this is a pig car. In other words, a container car, and so they're switching down. They're switching down the angle track to go down to the big slab of concrete that I talked about, where they had a loader to pick the containers off the trucks and put them on. Prior to having this machine to pick up the containers, the truckers used to have to back the back the trailers down about 4 car lengths. And each rail car had a ramp that could be put down. A pretty tricky deal. So, but the big thing here is this locomotive, besides doing this here, would have a hold of maybe a half a dozen box cars that had furniture in it, washers and dryers, refrigerators, stuff for Sears and Roebuck. So in this, he could be going south, and then going through a switch and going into the warehouse at Sears Roebuck. Sears Roebuck had access from either the north or the south end of their store, the warehouse.
I just want to point out one thing, Frank. Isn't this the end of your bridge? Wouldn't this be the land?
This was a staircase to go to a bridge that went across the BN yard and I-5, and then across the waterfront, and then down. You're on what the hell is the name of that road?
East Marginal Way.
You're on the waterfront.
Yeah, you're on the waterfront. So.
This is the yard office. This is 76, so 76, yeah, I'm here. So this is the track that the train crew started their shift on. And this is also, this was like a 1,500 horse switcher. I never cared for them because you had to idle them at really high RPMs in order to get them to move. With the little 1,000-horse switchers were Johnny on the spot, for you could just kick cars around pretty easy. But this is more difficult. Milwaukee used these at times in a consist. They might have like 3 5,000-horse three 2,000-horse Jeeps
Right.
in a train, but they need a little more horsepower, so they'd cut these in, and they'd go over to Othello at times. But we washed locomotives here, so there you see them switching again.
This would be the south end of the yard, right behind Sears. You can kind of see
one of the things
Sears.
you can really notice here, you can see this long switch. These are like a number 8 or number 9 turnout, and we had to have those because of the length of the pig cars. They were like 80-footers. They could not go through these number 4 turnouts. And these were actually built for like 40-foot rail cars, and we're running 50 and 60 foots. So every once in a while you might have a wheel up and lift up a little bit.
We're switching at the north end of the yard.
The north end of the yard. This is where, well, here's some pig cars here, empties. You can see the ramp that I was talking about. They dropped that ramp down there when they wanted to drive all the way on, when the containers had wheels underneath them. So this is where you'd make up cars, a string of cars to go to the waterfront. And then you'd come out of here and onto the main, or here, and come onto the main, and then the engine would be at the head end, and he's going north across Atlantic Street, and then the field switchman would be on the last car, and then he would tell the hoghead or give a signal to stop, and then they would ball face those cars onto the waterfront, past the Coast Guard station, and probably onto the main line, because the main line was primarily where the cars were going to go on the barge to be switched. They had to be switched around once they got over there, over to the waterfront. Well, here you can see what the horrible conditions of the Milwaukee. The rail cars and the locomotives running on these tracks just pump the water up. And of course, at high tide, this is just about a high tide.
Okay, so tell us about the bridge.
This is a pretty infamous bridge. This, at one time, this is the BN over here. So the BN had a car on this track, one set of wheels on this track, and one set of wheels on this track, and it knocked this support out of the bridge. So the bridge came down. And I made a deal with the Milwaukee. I got the bridge, and then I made a deal with the BN train master. I got like a 55-foot gondola with drop ends. The ends could fold down like a garage door, well, somewhat. And then 2 flat cars, one at each end of the gondola. And then I picked this crane up, or I had a crane that picked this bridge up, laid it on its side in the gondola, and took it over to the waterfront and put a for sale sign on it. And I sold it to a guy in Alaska. However, the sale was pending that I get the bridge over to the ship canal, where he had a barge, equipment barge, where he was taken to Alaska. And so I made, once again, I made a deal with the train crew and the train master at the BN to take it over there, and it cost me buying them lunch at the Harbor restaurant or something like that. So they couldn't make too many deals like that.
Here we just see the engineer switching, and then we'll move ahead, and we can kind of see the Sears building and see these guys switching now.
So this is the south end. This is Spokane Street down here. That's the Spokane Street Tower there. These tracks all go to the BN. So Milwaukee would come out of here or here, and then they would go shove cars down here to go to the BN yard. That was the interchange. And they could also pick up cars that the BN had for the Milwaukee and pull them up there and then ball face them down here into the yard to go to the industries that the Milwaukee supplied, like Rainier Brewery or Fisher Flour Mill or a number of other smaller industries. The Milwaukee didn't have a whole bunch of industrial spots. Their biggest thing was, in my time, was the 100 or so cars that would get off the barges. And then they had to shake those cars out to deliver some of the cars to the BN for a mainline haul or to UP for a mainline haul. Yeah, there's the tower. This was used a lot by Pacific Coast Coal out of Enumclaw. They would bring coal cars down here, and I was when I was just a little kid, I used to watch the steam trains here, and then they would go along the, what the hell streets? Utah.
Yeah.
Utah Avenue. And then you'll notice on First Avenue, down about where the Kingdom used to be, First Avenue, the buildings had sharp corners like this because the tracks went over to the waterfront like that. And so then the coal cars would go along there, and then they would go up an elevated rail up by the ships and dump the coal into the holes of the ships. Now you're talking about 45, 48 maybe.
So one of the interesting things one of my friends told me was that the tower operator at Spokane Street was responsible for manually operating the grade crossings. Gary, it was Dave Sproul that told me this when Dave Sproul worked there. And so the tower operators could never actually leave the tower because they never knew if there was going to be a switch engine going by, and they'd have to close the gates for the grade crossing. We could see an example of that here.
There's another interesting thing that took place here. Before we had the computers, we used to have clerks. We'd have I might have 12 clerks in a 24-hour period. They maybe worked we had 3 shifts, and so there might be 3 to 4 clerks on a shift. So we'd drive down here, and the clerks would drive down here, park on the side of the road, and one of the clerks would read the car numbers as the train's going by, coming into the yard. The other clerk would be writing them down. Then they'd go back to the yard office, and they'd punch them all up like this on a key punch, and then they'd print out this list of cars in the order that were there. And then you had the yard master maybe not the yard master, but another clerk would be in contact with Othello or on the East Coast where those cars were supposed to go. In other words, this car was a Sears Roebuck car, or this car was full of hops going to Rainier Brewery, and then they got switched out to little sidings, a sidetrack, and then eventually get over to the industries.
So here's the approach to Spokane Street from the south. We can see the approach signal. This is a Milwaukee train arriving as seen from a Northern Pacific train.
Here you got a drag coming into Seattle. And I don't know, all these chemical cars. Oh, they could have been going on, like sulfur cars went up to Port Townsend to the Crown Z mill at Port Townsend, and the ITT Rainier mill. ITT Rainier mill made photography paper, magazine paper.
So this was a picture from the 1960s. This is what it looked like in the 1970s.
Okay, here you're in UP country. This is Argo Yard. That's south of Spokane Street. A big yard. And really, so the Milwaukee would come up here with cars for the UP to interchange, and then they'd shove them down into, I think it was like number 12 track. And then right next to it would be cars that the UP had brought in from from down south that were for Milwaukee industries at the Milwaukee service. So they pick those cars up and then bring them here and switch them out onto the team track or Sears Roebuck.
We'll just take a quick look at these before we actually get to the waterfront.
Oh, this is a good picture of it. So here's where you can see then where they'd go in here and pick these cars up, bring them back here. Yeah, there's the switcher there.
Okay, now we're going to switch more to the waterfront. Just a quick idea. So we've taken a look at the Stacy Street yard on the bottom here, and now we're going to be looking up at Pier 27 at the top portion of this.
That's the piggyback facility. That's that slab of concrete I was telling you about. And wait a minute.
Yeah, you're right.
Oh, okay, we're going, this is west and this is east.
Correct. You got it.
Okay. This was a shack. This used to be longer here like this. This was a tavern on the waterfront. And when I came, that was all gone. This is my office here. This was where I had my cruise for the Seattle and North Coast Railroad. I don't understand all these vehicles here, but what was the date on it? 83, 83.
Seattle and North Coast.
83. I was just about out of here in 83.
So I want you to tell them about taking your dog to work and the customs agent.
Oh. So when Foss would bring down like so Foss was really going strong. They had 250, 252, 253, and 274, the 118, and sometimes they had what was called the G of G 900. G of G was Gulf of Georgia, and it was a ship's hull. So instead of going up into a barge, you went down into the ship's hull. And it was for ore cars. Ore cars are like 30 footers, but they could be 100 ton. Copper ore that they went up, they had a copper mine up, what is that? Up on the way to Princess Louisa. Does that make any sense to any of you? Anyway, so this is where I operated for the Seattle North Coast. Now, the cars that came down from BC quite often had to be inspected by the U.S.
Customs.
Yeah.
Customs, yeah.
Any case, I always had a Weimaraner hunting dog, and Barien was really helpful for me in the switch yards at Black River Yard, because the Hobo Junction was out there, and he always walked about 40 to 50 feet ahead of me, and I knew if there's anybody up there that might be pilfering cars or might give me a bad time. Well, he also stayed with me in this building here. And so a customs agent. We had a customs agent. It was a smaller fella, and he always liked to push his authority around. Well, the dog would lay underneath the desk sometimes, and this gentleman came in, just barged right in, and the dog got out of there and pinned him up against the wall. Put his paw, I mean, this is a big dog. He's over 100 pounds. And so I got to get my tit in a ringer on that. They complained to the Milwaukee, well, we couldn't complain to Milwaukee, but they complained to the Seattle North Coast that I had this dog. So I had to keep him in a truck when this particular fellow was coming. Well, this gentleman is Cliff Hughes. He was before me. He worked for the Milwaukee. He was quite a horse race fan. So when he left and I took over, the bottom drawer on this side over here was full of loser tickets from betting on horses.
From Long Acres.
But he was a pretty good guy.
Yeah, and a very sharp dresser, I need to say, for the era, you know, very sharp dresser.
Well, here you see the waterfront, and there's the UP grain cars that I was telling you about. The UP would have brought them in from up here, shoved them on here. The BN would take them off the other end, take them to the grain elevator. These are cars that have been unloaded off of the barges. So just to give you an idea, we could maybe handle 100 cars in a 12-hour period. So that is almost 2 trains. By the time you take part of them out to Black River, and then a train comes out of Tacoma with 20, 30 cars, couple them together, and you're heading east. Now you could have about 3,000-ton train to go over Snoqualmie. Very difficult job for the diesels. It's a snap thing for the electrics.
Now tell them about the car knocker.
Oh, so one other thing about this, because of these cars being here, it gave the Seattle and North Coast an opportunity to inspect the cars, like for brake shoes or air hoses that might be damaged. And then the car knocker that I had here, that's how I paid his wages. He'd walk those tracks, and then he would change those brake shoes or those air hoses, and then we could bill the UP or the car owner for making that repair.
So it was a way for the carmen to earn a living working for the railroad, and it just was one more clever way that Frank and the other people at the North Coast kept the North Coast going as long as they did.
Oh, so this is the switch. This is the track that's going across Harbor Avenue. Trying to get these people to stop to get these cars across here was not easy. As we use fusees, and sometimes had to put 2 guys here to stop this traffic. Then as soon as the car got on this side over here, going a string, we'd have a string of maybe, we usually have enough to fill 2 tracks. So on the Milwaukee barges, that'd be like 4 cars, and then 2 or 3 idlers. So then the guy with the fusee over here, he would get on the rail cars then and ride down. The other guy with the fusee would stay out here till the engine got by. He would be the head brakeman, and the first guy would be called a field man. So here, this is the 20 and 21. They've already been unloaded, and at this time in the 80s, the pulp mills were going pretty slow, so the Seattle and North Coast was really hanging out there for business, and the barges might not go back for a couple of days. Where when Cliff Hughes was there, and when I first started in the 70s, these barges made a round trip every 2 days. So that just was a big slowdown in Crown Zellerback and at both at Port Townsend and Port Angeles and ITT Rainier. And the lumber industry was almost completely dead. Shingle mills were dead. We carried propane, we carried sulfur, but all of the sulfur also dropped bad because the pulp mills weren't running. Oh, and then this is the 118, I'm pretty sure. And I thought this was this could be the 250 and that could be the 253. That would be the 274. The GFG 900 was only used under extreme conditions. And the Foss 118 was used to go to Port Gamble and was used to go to Shelton. And then there were times that it was used to go to North Vancouver. And one time, it was very rough out in the Straits by Deception Pass. And the 118 had to get to Seattle to be unloaded, to be loaded to go to Shelton. The skipper brought the 118 down through Le Conner. And that made some hair stand up. That was with a D boat.
Well, Frank, you took your own boat down through Le Conner too, and you said that wasn't even easy in your own boat, right?
Yeah, well, whatever you said is fine. I'm sorry, folks. Misplaced my hearing aids. Oh, this is way before my time. This is old Foss tug, the steam tug. You can see the stack here. The only tracks that were still here was this track and these 1, 2, 3, and this one over here. This track was used by the maintenance crew. Tacoma would send down, or Milwaukee would send down a shower car, a beanery car where crews could eat, and a car that had a bunk car, and then a tool car. And they would be on here. They'd make repairs here, and sometimes over by the freight house.
So this is a joint facility photo of the Northern Pacific. The Northern Pacific went around and took pictures of all of their facilities in the late 1920s. And I wanted to make a special thanks to Chuck Soule of the Northern Pacific Railway Historical Association for making this photograph available for us to use today. It's kind of a humorous caption that it's included as part of, just as public interest. And they call this area a gridiron. And of course, when you look at all the trackage, you say, well, it is kind of a gridiron, I guess, isn't it?
Hang on to this for a second.
Yeah.
I wanted to hang on to this for a second because when I came down here on the Seattle North Coast, there was a lot of junky stuff on the waterfront. There was down by the Coast Guard station, there was a railroad track that had been cut up to use, and they painted them yellow, and they were used for stopping people, keeping people from parking too close to the track. And we weren't, it was hard to generate, we were having a hard time generating enough money from the traffic up to the peninsula. So when we weren't switching cars, we tore up all kinds of stuff like this and sold it for scrap to pay our wages.
Well, and Alan Miller tells us from the Squiminar that towards the end, Milwaukee got cut off by the fuel companies, and so they needed to sell the scrap to be able to buy fuel to run their locomotives in the last couple of years. Things got fairly grim towards the end.
I think that these are loads. Judge, I'm trying to see if the car doors are open. If the car doors are closed, then they're probably loads, and we're going to unload it. And also judging from the apron is going down like that, so the barge is pretty heavy. And we'll pull this is number 3 track. We'll pull that out. That'll be about 4 cars long. And then we'll come back on number 1 track. We'll couple into that. Then we'll pull that out. And then there's a possibility that we would take them out over to the yard and put them on the main and come back with 8 cars, empties, put on here and here, and then we'd pull that off. And the reason we would do that is try to maintain an elevation stability. So, yeah, or listing.
Yeah, because they get a little tippy if you get too many loads on one side.
So I'm assuming, because of this lumber here, I'm assuming this is from Pope and Talbot or from Shelton. And then that would make this barge the 118. Now the 118, there were times, these cars were very heavy. This is green lumber. So, and these cars, you can see how low this here is. Well, if the barge went down as you're building a ton job, and the apron would go like this could get hung up on where it's coming from the apron to the land. And I had an incident once there, like in the middle of the night, and I used there was a crane unloading a ship, like this ship here over on Harbor Island. Forget the name of the crane company.
Manson.
Yeah, Manson. They had a large heavy-duty crane, and so they had unloaded that ship. But all the guys over it were still there, and the crane was still there, and they were watching movies on the side of the sheet metal building. I don't know what kind of movies.
Yeah, you do.
But I needed a crane really bad, so I called Tyke. Tyke was the guy's name. And he came over with a crane, picked that car up and put it on the track. And then I made some repairs on the track, finished doing the barge. In about 6 weeks or so, I get a real nasty letter from the Milwaukee Railroad in Chicago saying, "Who gave you the authority to hire a crane? We have a steam crane in Tacoma. We could have come down there and picked that up." I said, "Yeah, it would have taken like 3 to 5 days. In the interim period, I unloaded and loaded 200 rail cars to give you traffic." And I never heard another word. Well, this is what it's like to go off the end without a barge there, which you might see.
Yeah, don't spoil the story, but yeah.
Oh, one other thing here. So this is pretty modern stuff here. This is an electric over hydraulic winch. It was really great. You could, if the tug happened to move the barge when you were hooked up to this, it would be like a salmon hitting your fishing rod, your reel peeling off when you get a salmon. So only it was big time. Prior to this, it was all done by hand, a big hand winch.
And we'll see some examples of that courtesy of the Port of Seattle. So, and then wasn't it your friend Bob Shanklin that put these in? Bob Shanklin, did he put those in for you?
The what?
Bob Shanklin?
Oh yeah, I don't know if you ever heard of gentleman Bob Shanklin. Bob and I worked together on the Milwaukee Railroad, and he was the head of B&B, building and maintenance, the whole thing, taking care of like the beanery at Cedar Falls and any kind of building repair. He was just a really great individual, and we had a good rapport. And I talked him into coming to work for the Seattle North Coast Railroad because the Milwaukee was shutting down. And so Bob, he saw what I was going through, reeling in the barges with the old hand winches. So he convinced Milwaukee to spend the money to put these in. That's the 20 and 21. This is a car of anhydrous ammonia. So the Coast Guard got very nosy when they all of a sudden realized we were handling hazardous material on these barges. And then they tried to dictate to me where I could put them on the barges. And so I had to sit down and explain to them, same as I've been doing with you, how we had try to keep the barges in such a manner that we could unload them when they got to their destination. So that's anhydrous ammonium. That went to SQUIM.
There you go.
Oh, it could also have been chlorine. We had chlorine, and that went to SQUIM.
So we've got an example here. This is a Milwaukee barge number. Is this the 20 or 21? This is one of our barges, right? The 20 or the 21. This is not a Foss barge, right?
Okay, well this is the 21 because here's the 20. The 20 is unloaded. So when the tug, the Carroll Foss, which was the primary tug to take the tandem barges to Port Townsend, when they got out in Elliott Bay, they put the tug in between the two barges, and they would come into Pier 27 and put the 20 into the slip, and then the 21 would sit out here like that. Kind of a little bit adrift because they just put a tagline on it. Then when this barge was unloaded, and if we weren't going right back up to Port Townsend, then they would spin it around and park it on this side over here. And when they did that, this barge would have been, while they were doing that, this barge was sitting over here like this. Well, I would grab a hold of that tagline, and I would winch it around, and I'd pull this barge in without a tug.
By hand.
Then I'd unload this, and then they'd take this out and put it over here, and then previously you saw two barges up here. They might bring one of those and put it in here, depending on what was on the menu for the day. This is a different load. Now this is a 60-foot car. So you can see that's a 50-foot car here. So, and this is quite a bit longer. So that's a 60-foot car. That's probably chlorine. You know, an interesting thing, they have a pop-off valve, a safety valve up in here. So if it generates too much pressure, it can release itself. And that safety valve is actually a round disc of lead, and it can expand that lead to look like an egg. I got knocked off the car one time. It was on Harbor Island. I put a car on the barge, and when I walked by the car, it knocked me down onto the ground. I had to crawl off the barge and recuperate in the shack. That was on Harbor Island. That was when I was working for Peter Bricks. I was handling all rail cars to Alaska. Well, this is a good view of traffic. So once again, you've got 12, 24, double, 48 round trip, roughly 48 cars. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You got 21 cars, 42 cars there. This was already emptied, so it might have had 20 cars. So you got 100 cars, over 100 cars in a turnaround in about an 8-hour day. That's everybody. That's a lot of work. A lot of friggin' ass work. Well, here they're coming back from Port Townsend. You can see by the draft here, they're loaded. The cars are loaded. He's coming into Elliott Bay, and now he's cutting off. And as you get in a little further, then you'll see a picture of them doing the lines when they're breaking up, and the tug will be in here like this and go on into Pier 27. It's pretty much the same thing.
Yeah, pretty much the same thing. A John Illman photo from John was from Marrowstone Island, a very famous photographer. We got permission to use these at the Squiminar, and we could just see them. They're loading up on the barge. So let's go to the next image.
Well, that's what I was talking about, breaking up. So this guy and this guy are bargemen. They're guys these fellas lived in the shack, the building that you saw at the end of the barge, and they took buckets of coal on there because they heated the place with coal and so forth, and they all retired about in when I came along, they retired about 74, and then we did not replace them. Any case, they are disconnecting the tow cable here. Here's the cable, and these two guys are working on the stern of the Carol. I'm assuming it's the Carol. That's a pretty hard job, handling that. This is 6-inch. This is 6-inch diameter line. When it's wet, it's heavy. I'm going to tell you a little story. Once again, this is on Harbor Island at Pier 15 and a half. So the tugboat crew had a change of crew. In order to do that, they took the tugboat over to the Waterfront over by Alaska Street, by the Coast Guard station, if you're familiar with that. And so I'm left there with the barge, and I had to get the barge out from under the apron because the tide was coming in, and the barge was still under the apron, so it would lift the apron up. We lift it up so high that it upset the counterbalances, the concrete counterbalances. So I grabbed a line from the barge to a series of pilings. Forget what it's called. It's
dolphin.
Dolphin, yeah, maybe 5 or 7 pilings with one taller one. So I got a line on it like that. And so I tightened the line as tight as I could. Then I went back to the apron, and I put some slack in the cable. And I went back out on the barge and tied up the line a little bit more. And I went back, and then I unhooked the cable from the apron to the barge. And so now the barge is adrift, and as it's a little bit adrift, I'm pulling in the slack. I got 2 of these dolphins going. And so how do I get off the barge? This is like 1 o'clock in the morning. So I have my flashlight. I sent a SOS signals to the Crowley dispatch office where Crowley had his tugs right next door. Finally, one of the guys woke up, and they came over and got me.
Yeah, if you could imagine, it's like 1 o'clock in the morning, and where's your father? He's out on a barge. So
I don't remember ever. That I mean before my time.
the Lummi Bay is a wood
That's a
hull
wooden
tug.
hull tug.
Yeah, wood hull tug. But we could. What are they doing with the ropes?
Oh, the tagline?
Yeah.
Okay, so once again here you got a 6-inch line. Pretty difficult to heave that. You see how they work on the ferry dock, on the ferries. They're pretty. And plus those are plastic lines on the ferry. These would soak up water. So this is what's called a tag line here. And it's fastened on here. So he then can pull this line over, and he puts it on one of the cleats here, or he's taking it off one way. I don't really know which way they're going there.
It's hard to tell. It's a still image, so they could be going one way or they could be going the other. We just don't know. We just have this moment of time. And we're going to talk about these pictures in the credits a little bit. Go ahead, Frank.
So I think you're going to see another photo of this. And I think what it is he's getting slack off of this. This is a powered winch. It rotates around like that. And this device here is for tying a line off. But I think he's going to get some slack off of here, or else he's winding it up. He's taking it off the bit and he's winding it up there. I don't know which way it's going.
Up in the wheelhouse.
That's the skipper on the tug.
Yeah, we'll see another picture of him.
That was the Milwaukee tug. There he's throwing a tag line, and then he's going to pull this line off of there. So that could be outbound, and that's how they secured the 2 barges together. On the Foss barges, like if they went with the 250 and the 252, you had two cables. You had a double drum on the tug, and you had one cable that went clear underneath the first barge to the second barge. The tug held both of the
Didn't know that. Huh.
barges. There you can see, that's a picture of, you saw earlier, of the guy on the, up here. And so I'm assuming he's reeling in that line. Okay, so this is how we used to, this is a man killer. And this is a dog right here that locks into this gear. As you wind, when you wind this in, you're pulling the barge in, or you're securing it up to the apron. And as you wind this dog drops into these stoppers. If he lets go of this, then it won't go away. So when you wanted to let the barge out, when you had to put slack in it, you had to push down on here, and at the same time, pull this out and release. This would be like an airplane propeller, could be. If the tug happened to be pulling on the headline is what you saw earlier with the guy around that reel of rope. If the tug jerks on that, pulls here, this thing was deadly. This is what we eventually got rid of. Well, Bob Shanklin put those electric over hydraulic winches on. A great improvement. Well, this gentleman's name is Tom. He was the last of the bargemen, and this was before my time, or just when I first came. It used to be that they tried to wedge the barge, the rails into the match up with the rails on the barge. And we got rid of these, and we put gauge rods between the rails like this in about 3 places. And then heavy duty come-alongs here, and we could slide those tracks about 8, maybe even 10 inches like this. Still had to be really careful if you came off the barge and you had a little bit of a wow to it, that you didn't derail. But for the most part, it worked really good. And you look pretty hard to see, but so this might, yeah, this track, these two rails are for that track. This one is for the other. You'll see this kind of rough edge here. That's because we took a torch and we burned the ball of the rail a little bit to make a little more room for the wheels to get in. So
here's an example of that.
Old picture. I don't know what this barge is. This is the apron. Once again, you can see how we trim the rail.
It's the 20, according to the caption on the photo.
I don't know how it could be MT20, but I don't know how the timber got there.
Okay. So we all know the joke about the Edgewater Hotel.
And the Beatles.
Well, he's not fishing from his boxcar, folks.
You know, that's the incorrect information on that last photo. Because the 20 and 21, the rails were up on 12 by 16 timber. They were not on the flush deck like this. So whoever wrote this is in error. That's not the Barge 20.
Okay, I'm glad we got that. I'm glad we came back to that one. So now we're back to this one, and now he's, because I first saw this picture and I thought to myself, he's fishing from a boxcar. But the answer is what? What is he doing up there?
Well, that's either the skipper of the tug or the mate, and he's given directions via a radio. That's not a fishing pole, that's a radio antenna. I used to do it with a fusee. Climbed up on cars at Pier 30 for cars for Puget Sound freight lines. coming across the waterfront. I'd stand up there with my fusee, 3 cars, 2 cars, 1 car, easy. Boy, when you slop that, if you slop that fusee stuff on, it'd burn you right now.
Oh, boy, yeah. So again, we just got a picture of the 20 and the 21 next to it at the dock.
I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, okay.
When I first moved to Seattle in 1995, a lot of
Well-
it was still there.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
It was kind of, we got chased out by the geese.
Oh, there you go. There you go. Yeah. So here we're getting into the 1970s again. We're back to, we had some of these at the beginning of the program, and now we're coming back and looking some more. And
So here you can see it's the 250. And I think you said it was 250-foot barge. But that 250 foot is including from here to here. The rails were only like maybe 200 feet. This barge is a 4-track barge. My guess is that this is the 252, because the 252 and the 250 always went in tandem tow to Vancouver.
so just a little bit of a spoiler alert here. Keep an eye on this fellow right here. Who is this guy?
Oh, well, that's some big shot there. I don't know.
Yeah. So here these guys are hanging out on the tug. I don't understand why more people didn't fall overboard. I mean, they're just sitting out there on the edge of the tug.
Here's a really good example. You see how the vessel is lower at the stern, so they have flooded the tank. They have ballast tanks. The 250, 252, 253, and 274 all had ballast tanks. So you could have a 10-foot tide, and you could fill that with water, but boy, you better have everything better be connected, because they want to push right up, slide right off of there. You pull the blocks out from underneath the wheels here, they want to slide off the barge. This happened in Alaska.
So here we're loading, or unloading, I guess, right?
Well, I'm assuming, judging from the elevation here, I'm assuming that the barge is not under the apron yet. Also, the cable is at a bad angle to the barge, so, oh yeah, that's the, oh, there's the turnbuckles, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah,
So
explain
there's your
those.
turnbuckles for moving the trackage back and forth, maybe 6 or 8 inches, but that was only to get you in there. Once you got them in there, then you could slide the barge just a little bit with these cables to get a pretty straight joint. You wanted to get it as straight as you could, because having a derailment on it between the barge and the apron was not good. So you see this chain? This chain goes to the concrete counterweights that are in here. They are like, they're probably about 20 tons. And so the one night, I couldn't always get a train crew. And also, the night crews were like the 10:30 job and the 11:59 job, and they were always kind of hazardous coming to work. So anyway, the barge was lifting up the apron. The tide was coming in. The barge was lifting up the apron. It got slack in this chain. It fell off of the sheave up here. Now this sheave is just about this diameter. So I go up here like this, flashlight in my mouth, and a bar, and put that chain back on that sheave. Oh, I got it on. I'm happier than hell, but I can't move. I was wearing a real shirt instead of just this. But the shirt got caught between the chain and the sheave. I had to rip the whole front of the shirt off. When I went over to the yard office, they all got a pretty good bang out of that. I didn't. I was happier than hell to get out of there.
So the Carol, up against, up against the barge. And we're going to see some pictures next of actually unloading the barge in the 70s.
So well, the 250, so the 250 was always married to the 252. That was a tandem tow. Just like the 253 and the 274, always went together. So here you are, the tide is pretty high, and so we're pulling this is a 4-track barge. We're pulling the number 4 track. We're pulling cars off the number 4, taking them down. So here you can see the list of the barge because this track is empty. You can also see there's a little space between here and here. So now we have gone over to the number 2 track. This is number 4. Number 3 is sitting here with cars on it. We've gone over to number 2 and we're going to pull that off in order to somewhat level this barge. We can also, we have the option to pump, this is a tank here and a tank here. So we can pump water out of one side or in on one side to help maintain the stability. But that takes time. So you gotta, and that has to be done by a tugboat's crew. Okay,
Not the
so
railroad
now we're
crew.
gonna make it pull off of here. This is a different operation than the previous one. So this is lumber from either Pope and Talbot or Shelton, and this is like a 65-foot car, and it has you can't see it in this picture, but there's a large beam underneath here, and then it has braces from that beam down here up to the side here, and that's what got hung up at the hinge pier one night.
When you had to get Manson out.
We were very, very fortunate. We didn't tear. The hoghead was really, really good. Sometimes they want to go a little too fast. I want no faster than walking speed till you get off the barge. Yeah. Then you can go do what you want.
I want to recall that.
Well, I became a train master later, so they had to listen to me.
Would that boxcar still have been there in 1995?
The tool car.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, do you remember the history of this tool car?
Well, this is probably one of those cars left over from when you saw the menagerie of tracks down there. So this car was here as a coal storage. They put chunks of coal in here, and the bargemen when they came to work, they would get a wheelbarrow and come down here and load it up with coal to heat their little shack. So here you can see how close the cars are together. In the wintertime, in extreme weather, and this all be done by the boat crews, not the train crews. They had to crawl between here and chain these cars down. These cars were chained like to this track and jacked. You can't hardly see it, but there's jacks that go up and chains that go down to secure those cars. A number of times we've lost cars. One time we lost a couple cars up by Deception Pass, and I went up there, and here is a property owner, and he's got a cat on the beach, and he's trying to pull the cat up, pull that boxcar of lumber because he wanted to keep it. I don't think so. I had the same thing happen up on the Olympic Peninsula too. So there you can see, now they've gone off the number 2 track, that leaves number 1 and number 3. And so if you saw the 250 alongside and the 250 was empty, and this is the 252, there's a good chance that they're going to unload only. So now you can see the elevation change between here and here. they've got to put water into these tanks. So I'll tell the first mate or the captain, and so he'll get a boatman up here or an engineer, probably the engineer on the tug, and turn these pumps on and fill it up. We have to do that before we can take these two off, because the barge will come way too high and will derail. Well, this is your drawbar, or this is a coupler. This is the drawbar. This is a keeper for the drawbar. This, I'm just going to say, let's say this is a 6-inch wide hard steel, and this drawbar has a slot in it. You can't see it in here, but it has a slot that is a half again as long as this is wide. So this drawbar can move back and forth in here like this. And so this is a knuckle, a pin and a knuckle that is welded onto the barge. And I'm guessing this is the 252 because the 250 would be quite high here. So the train comes in here. You got a field man here. He's a trainman, and you call him a field man. And he's walked down, or he's ridden down on this bar, and he's telling the hoghead, come ahead, and that'll do. So he tells him that'll do. He'll see the pin drop here, which locks this coupling. And most generally, this is left in a closed position, and this is in an open position. There have been times when, for whatever reason, they would open this knuckle and this to separate the cars from the barge. So once you make this joint, this field man has to make sure these pins drop. So what he might have to do, he's on a radio or hand signal, and he's telling the hoghead to back up, easy back. So he'll stretch the train just a little bit till he knows that this coupling is good. Very, very important going to Alaska. Extremely important. So then once it's good, then he'll have the hoghead come ahead, easy ahead. And he'll bunch up this slack. So this might have been out here like this. And he's going to bunch it up. So can be no movement. And then he'll build up the air. And then the boat crew will go along and set all the handbrakes. And then they'll put the blocks on the front end and probably a chain.
We'll see some examples of the blocks in a future picture.
Okay, so the 20 is in the slip, it's been unloaded. The Carol Foss is going to take it around, spin it around, and I thought maybe you'd see a line on this going over to the slip, but so then they'll put that over there, and either I might mess around with trying to get it in, or they might have a D-boat on the other side to push it in. I usually did not try to get another assist boat from Foss because it was pretty expensive. If they wanted to have an assist boat there for their own barges, that's their business.
So here we are, we're starting to leave town. This is heading out.
My guess is we're heading out of town.
Yeah.
The cars are empty. He's heading out of town.
You know, I don't understand why more people didn't fall off. I mean, look at this guy on the end.
You can't see it with this one here, but these are hydraulic pins on a tug that can be raised up, and they keep the cable in the center for steering. It helps maintain the stability.
No life jackets.
There was,
Before OSHA, obviously.
you know, there's no PPE in any of these pictures. You know, I mean, when you think about, you know, all of the equipment that people need to wear now versus what we see in these pictures in these pictures from 1969, it's just amazing. And you're looking at this guy at the back of a ship, you know, back of a tug in the ocean. So we're getting to the end here, folks, so not too much more suffering, I promise. But this next picture just really appealed to me because these things just bulldoze their way all the way out to Port Townsend. So here you are, Frank, you're on the water, you're heading out.
So these are chocks. It's really hard to see here, but on these two barges here, they're pretty small, about the big. But to pick them up, they were like maybe 70 pounds, and they had like a four-pointed star, and you used a maul to spin it around. It had a heavy bolt, and so you put them on there. In the wintertime, or if the weather was, we knew it was going to be bad, we'd sometimes put a railroad tie across there and then chain it way back here, just extra precaution.
And here we are, in fact, here we are starting to head out of town, and you can see they always went in the same order. Which one went first, the 20 or the 21?
20.
The 20 went first.
And here's the interesting here. You can, one of the reasons you can, these are loads, but this is empty. Because we never had a hazardous material load on the outside track.
Okay. Explain the lights on the cabin.
Oh, okay, this is your port and starboard lights, and they are on the 20. That's your stern light. I have these two. They were oil. Burned oil. That's the skipper on Milwaukee tug. I never met him.
It's 1969, so it was before Frank got down to the waterfront, but these pictures were just so cool, I had to include them. And of course, one of the great things about working on the barge or working on the tugs was the food.
That's the galley.
That skipper that we saw a little bit earlier, look at all of the just the classic. You've got that ashtray that is like designed so it doesn't fall over. The table has the ends, so if something spilled, it just runs onto the floor. You've got the captain having some coffee with the cook behind him. You know, it's just great stuff. It's just really great stuff. And here we are heading out of town, and we can see on one end the Space Needle, and on the other end the box the Space Needle came in.
Once again, you're outbound. You can see they're empty. And once again, one of the previous pictures showed the two guys here and two guys here, and they're messing around with the lines. So there's only one tow line, and these two are held together right here with those two. On the Foss barge, you got a double drum. You got a double drum winch on here. You got one line that's going all the way under here to this barge, and you have what's called a surge line, a surge chain. On like if you looked at the 250 as a very large chain like this, really heavy shit, and that's a surge chain, and it hangs down like this, and so it can go like this. That's your surge from the sea to handle the sea.
Okay, just a couple pictures left, I promise. One of them is this great article that Dave Sproul found for us. December 31st, 1949, a ship was coming into Elliott Bay trying to avoid a log boom in the harbor and harpooned the barge and sank the barge. So we saw the barge in one of the early pictures from the 1920s. And of course, the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, in their editorial wisdom, captioned this out of their element, of course, these floating boxcars, because they were full of lumber and therefore were buoyant. And then, of course, one of the other great stories, Frank, you'll remember this one.
One of the things you don't get back when this happens is the trucks and the wheels, because they all fall off the cars.
So what happened here?
Well,
Wasn't quite this bad, folks, but it makes a great cartoon.
Well, I had an incident like this, not quite like this. So the train crew, I'm in the office, and all of a sudden I see rail cars coming across the street going down to the barges. And the barge is sitting down by the apron, but it's not under the apron. It's back from the apron. And so the train crew, for whatever reason, they're thinking it's underneath the apron. So I come out running like hell, trying to flag them down. And I didn't get them stopped until this car was on the apron, and the weight of the car broke the lifting mechanism.
Oh.
And so one set of trucks went off the end, but the handbrake held. I was able to keep it on because it came uncoupled because of going like that. It came uncoupled up above. Anyway, we got it all fixed.
Now, that's one of the beautiful things about spending some quality time with Frank like I've done here the last couple of years, because this is like the 4th time he's told this story, and it's the first time that he ever told me that it snapped the wire on the apron. So
I just remembered something about that incident. That particular car was loaded with clay, and the clay is used to make the magazine paper. So I was going to ITT Rainier. So it was a big hustle to get it, to keep it from getting in the water.
So I just got a couple of, just want to go through the credits quick and thank some of the people that made this presentation possible for today. First, the Center for Railroad Photography and Art in Madison, Wisconsin. They graciously helped us last year with the Swimmar with the John Illman images, in that we repurposed those images for today's program. I'd also like to thank the various photographers, starting out with the Port of Seattle. The Port of Seattle published an in-house magazine called The Reporter, and we had a copy of the April 1st, 1969 edition. And and they had some of the pictures that we saw today were from that magazine. And so I reached out to the Port of Seattle and I said, gee, we've got this magazine article. In fact, Aaron Schwartz, one of our guys in the back, was the person that pointed out this magazine for me. And so I contacted the Port of Seattle. They replied the next day. That afternoon, another person from the Port of Seattle replied, and they said, we only used 7 photos in that magazine article, but there's over 100 pictures. Would you like those? So all of the black and white images that you saw today of the barge, this was only the 2nd time that the public has ever seen those. The first time was last weekend in Vashon. So a very special thanks to the Port of Seattle for just really exceeding my expectations in terms of making this stuff available. I want to thank our researchers, Aaron, Paul Kruger, Mr. Crosby, Russ, Mark Waleski, Frank Zellerhoff, of course, and our friends from the Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive that helped so much, Richard Wilkins, Virginia Wright, NPRHA, Chuck Soule. We talked about Chuck earlier. Thanks again, Chuck. Here's a copy of that Port of Seattle Reporter magazine. It was titled Milwaukee's Seagoing Railroad. And a special thanks to them. They were so helpful and really made this presentation with the images that they were able to add. I want to thank our guests last week, the Vashon Heritage Museum, and this week our dear friends at the Highline Heritage Museum. You can watch today's program in the future on YouTube. You can watch it as long as we have an internet. So again, these programs are available and we put them online so that people can watch them again in the future. Cascade Rail Foundation maintains its collections of photos, maps, and ephemera at the Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive in Burien, Washington, which is a block down the street on 153rd. PNRA provided the Zoom stream for today's presentation. I want to thank Brad Srebnick, who's in the audience today, for working on creating that map that we used. It was very nice, a lot of work. And I also want to thank my dear friend Joshua Wiersma, Autochrome Media, who does all of our media productions for these programs. I'm your executive producer, Jonathan Fisher. This is a Cascade Rail Foundation presentation. And all I can say at an hour and 33 minutes is so long, and thanks everybody for watching today. And a big thanks to our friend Frank. for a great program.
Thank